Welcome to the Elder Observation. I'm your host, Pharaoh El-Aton, and I'm glad you can join me. The Elder Observation is a series of recorded interviews for the purpose of saving history, capturing history from older men and women, brothers and sisters around the country and around the world. In today's episode, I'm going to be doing an interview with Brother Will Crosby, and this is going to be very interesting. I hope you enjoy it, so check it out.
But I was born in the city of Chicago in the month of May of 1952 at the all-black hospital called Providence Hospital on 51st Street. I'm 71 years old now. I grew up in what they call the Valley. That's when I was a little bitty boy. And that was like 48th and St. Lawrence. And then 47 State Street. You know, that's a little bit that's a Knockham Head area. You know, that was where the Owl Theater existed, and DuSable High School was down the street. That was my father grew up at. And 48 where my mother grew up. So in my early life, that was down there. Then we moved from there to 71st Street in Inglewood back in the 50s. I think it was like 54, I think it was. 55. We moved to Inglewood. And so that was like at 71st around Harvard. You know, I used to always tell people, you know, I grew up on Harvard. I played on Princeton, and I went to school on Yale. That was my little joke, because it was Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. You know about that whole thing. Inglewood. And then from say 54 to 66, I was on 71st Street. When Martin Luther King went to march in the Marquette Park, I remember his workers saying, "You all want to march with us?" And we tell them, "No, we throw rocks at them people over there." You talk about marching. I'll never forget when Dr. Jim came back and said that he had been all through the South. He had never met no people like the ones that was in Marquette Park. I said, yeah, they was no joke. You know, I mean, they said march out there with their Nazi uniforms on 71st Street. It was that serious. So, you know, yeah, I had my life when, you know, it was on 71st Street, you know. And so, you know, that's the same area that, you know, Emmett Till and them, you know, basically it was all of that, you know, it's like when you came out of what's known as the Black Belt, you get to the Emmett Till area, which is what, like Washington Park area, I think like 61st Street, back to about 67th Street. And so, that was, you know, I tell people I grew up in a lot of places in Chicago because my grandparents stayed at 78, and my great-grandparents and great-grandparents, after they moved from the low end, they stayed at 78th and Evans. And that was like in 52, they moved there. When I was perfect, no, 52. 54, they moved there. They bought property there in 54. And so that was in what they call Chatham, you know, and that's where you see Ernie Banks walking down the street, and Mahalia Jackson. All them were in the neighborhood, Lou Rawls. They all lived in that neighborhood at the time. So it was like it was a heck of a growing up experience being around 79th Street over there when I go visit my grandparents, you know, and remember being a little boy, used to have the early morning breakfasts. You know, I call it down south, up north food. You know, they make all this food up in the morning on Sunday, before they go to church, they get up like 5 o'clock in the morning. They be cooking up everything. 4 or 5 different kind of meats, grits, eggs. Just down south kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? As a little boy, all my aunties and uncles and all would them show up on this Sunday morning to eat with my great grandmother. Because my great grandfather had passed away. Matter of fact, we was little kids all playing on top of my great grandfather when he passed away. So I always like to say the spirit of the ancestors is riding with me because I played on top of an ancestor who went from life to the ancestor level. Oh, when Martin got killed. Well, let's go back to Malcolm. I'd rather start at Malcolm X when Malcolm X got killed. I'll never forget my father had me and my brother stay up and watch Malcolm X on, I think it was called the O'Connor Show. And Malcolm was roasting this guy. Because Malcolm was using books and reading stuff out of books, and then the guy said, well, you're a racist. He said, no, this is your book. I'm just reading out your own book, sir. Now you would tell me I'm a racist? This is your book. You all wrote this, not me. I'm just reading back you what was written. And so, Malcolm was definitely putting a whole new generation of thinking in the 60s on people. And so when he got killed, it was like, man, they killed Malcolm X. Because Malcolm X was shaking them up. He didn't take no prisoners. You have a discussion with him, he was slaying them. He said, no, if you hit me, I'm hitting you back. He was a whole, it was a contrast that they had heard from black people before. But then he had left the Nation of Islam at this period. And so now he's on his own, speaking on for himself. And so he had a whole different kind of vision that he was pushing, because he's talking about the organizing, black people. And so my father was deep into that. My father was my hero. My daddy was, he went to World War II. He was 16 years old, but it'd been the Depression, so wasn't no food. My father used to always talk about having to eat rutabagas during the Depression time, right? So, when you think about that stuff, and then you start going through the years, and I'd be reflecting, I'd be like, boy, what they did to these ancestors in our communities, like, it's rough. So when you talk about assassinations, for the young people, we would listen to Malcolm. And so Malcolm was very influential. I wound up going to Malcolm X College when it began. I used to go to school in Jewtown. Walk across the rats to get to school. But Malcolm was like the first assassination that we understood. You know what I'm saying? And when it came to Martin Luther King, I don't think when Malcolm got assassinated, people was like, they didn't know how to relate to it. Because there were people trying to say it was the Nation of Islam, but nobody really knew, so everybody was like, well, they kind of froze on that Malcolm, the terms of the community going off. But when Martin Luther King got killed, they was like, look, here's the man. He don't want to beat you up. He ain't got no pistols, no guns. And then you want to kill him? And so the people across the nation, they just snapped. Only place they didn't snap was where James Brown was, but they still snapped there too. But not as widely as like Chicago. Now prior to Dr. King dying, there was a riot on the west side of Chicago. Dr. King came and lived on the west side of Chicago. And so there was a riot there in 67, if I remember right, a rebellion in 67. And that rebellion was because most folks will know how slummy Roosevelt Road was, how old the housing was. They were old wooden buildings. I remember they had the big fire in Chicago. This is probably what they had rebuilt back quickly, and it had been around for a long time, you know. And so the riot took place in '67. It already set the tone for when it happened. It was maybe '66 it took place. I get the year, '66, '67, I can't remember exactly what year. But when in '68, black folks was on a whole nother vibration. You know, and black youth were in the forefront. When people talk about what happened down south, who did the march, well, Dr. King had a lot of young people doing marching. Because he was young, so he was 39 years old. And when he started, he was like 29 years old. Whew, excuse me, I didn't get that. Been up since 3 a.m. this morning. Dr. King, people, they snapped, you know, because, you know, they said, here you all get violent with a man who was nonviolent. That wasn't cool. So when you talk about almost every major city across America, something took place, you know. And so, you know, you get that time where this is a period where the police is like, you know, very repressive, you know, to the point that they even kill you, you know. But they was doing it, but folks could, you know, they couldn't relate to things about the police at that time was killing people. But it proved out when they killed Fred Hampton. So when you go through all these different assassinations, and you're talking about they killed each one of them. They were murdered by a bullet. Except when it comes to Fred Hampton, they kind of overkilled, because they probably shot up in his house probably 1,000 times, you know, and they was probably mad because he was feeding the children. And the children was taking a position against the police. Anybody wasn't working for the community. Like I say, the Chicago Black Panther Party probably was the most active party in America. They sold newspapers everywhere. Every week you had to get your Black Panther Party newspaper. You waited for that Black Panther Party newspaper to come out. So when you start thinking about the assassinations, even up to, you know, I was telling a brother the other day about Fred Hampton, how I found out about Fred Hampton. First time I found out about him. I didn't know they called him the chairman, Fred Hampton, at the time. But I said, man, I saw a brother named Fred Hampton today, man. You know, the high school I went to, we had all these riots, right? So they kicked out a bunch of students, just arbitrarily, just to make it look like, hey, we got y'all in. You didn't catch nobody doing it, but you chose to just cut out a certain amount of them out, like about 400 students they got rid of at the high school I was at. Because the year Dr. King died, it was a black and white high school. But come back that fall of '68, most of the whites was gone. Because after Dr. King got assassinated in April of '68, the high school had riots every day to the end of the school year. And then it turned and flipped over to the next year when school came back. Action didn't stop. And so that's '68. And at that time, that's when Fred Hampton's name is ringing through the streets amongst the young people. But you know about the Black Panther Party? Oh yeah, oh yeah. It was just moving around like that, you know what I'm saying? And so when you go to these different, you got to look at, and it's very interesting when you look at from a reflection standpoint. Because during the same period, you had Lumumba killed in the Congo. You had them go after Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta. They was trying to do assassinations of black people across the world. Because we were talking about, hey, we threw this, we subservient to you. For what? You know, so it was definitely a change. It was a spirit in the air. You know, so it's been consistent to stay in the air, and that's what they're having to deal with today. The black people are not standing around thinking they're gonna wait. You know, now it's time for movement, and that's what black people are doing now. You see more younger people crossing borders, getting their passports, seeing the world, which the generations before them had never even probably got off the side of town they was on. Right, Molotov cocktail and shit, and looting and taking shit. You know, you talk about where the riots took place at. It was very, very low economic situation. Like I told you, when they burnt down Roosevelt Road, it was basically slum road. Look, even on Madison Street, around Hartsfield, there used to be a place called Skid Row. Now, Skid Row had all these old rich white men, formerly rich white men, who slept on the ground. I remember being a little boy, my mother taking me someplace on Madison. We having to step over these old white men sleeping on the ground on Skid Row. Kind of finds out that they had been the guys who had been in the stock market industry and lost their money in the 20s and never recovered. Psychologically just snapped and never came back. And so, you know, Chicago was interested in that, but at the time, I remember I talked about this house and they was living in, it was old because it was probably still the same buildings that after they had the Chicago fire, they put these buildings up. And, you know, the wood had a smell to it in these old buildings. You would go in and it's like it had a certain kind of smell to it, you know what I'm saying? Because it was wood, it was old, and you know, a lot of people lived in and out of it. And like I said, it was like tenement living in at that time too, so you know, it was nothing to have a 3-flat with 50 people living in a 3-flat. Because it's a tenement house, so everybody got little rooms. They don't have a whole apartment, they got a room here, a room there, room there, you know. And so, yeah, it definitely was different. Yeah, you know, I grew up on the block on 71st where we had the district coders and the vice lords. And my father built a stage for them to have a party because of a brother on the block called Crump, who was, I was a little boy, I was maybe 6, 7 years old. But they had a gang fight on my block. And I'm sitting in the window watching it. That's when they had zip guns and brass knuckles. This is in the 50s. And so that's why I'm 6, this was maybe 58. You know, or they may pull off an antenna off of a car and beat you with an antenna, like a metal whip. So they had brutal fights, you know, when I was a little boy. So instantly coming up at Inglewood because some of these guys was from actually 47th Street or the West Side, but they lived, you know, like I tell people, a lot of times you say West Side, South Side, but you know, I didn't never think of it like that when I was growing up. To go over there on 14th and anything was 1400 South. So I didn't think of it being no West Side. Only as of lately, after the 50s, they started, you hear more people talking about the West Side, but prior to the 50s, prior to the 60s, when you're on the West Side, it was like the South Side. Because we didn't go so far on the West Side, I think like Madison was almost our cutoff at the time. Could have been even Lake Street, but I'm just thinking. And so that's when the whole West Side had more Germans and Jews in the 50s. And in the 50s, there was this great migration. I don't know if you remember, there used to be a train station down here on like 14th Street. And for years, from the 40s to the mid-70s, probably, people was coming up from the South, you know, and If people coming in, but the quickest place you could get an apartment was on the west side, and prices were more reasonable. And so a lot of people went to the west side first, initially, when they came to Chicago. Then if they liked the west side, they need to move to the south side. You know? They moved to the south side because, I was thinking about my grandfather used to live at around Lake in Halsted. And they moved from Lake and Halsted with a push cart. That's 2 wheels and a flatbed. And moved all the way to the south side to a 4-flat apartment building. Because on the first floor was this big, tall store floor. There was a store. And then it had 3 floors on top as apartment. Well, we lived on the top floor. And on that top floor, there was these pot-belly stoves. It was called a coal flat. So you had to fill the pot-belly stove with wood, and then it would make heat for the apartment. So that was living on State Street. And so that's before there was a Dan Ryan Highway. I remember as a little boy playing in the Dan Ryan hole, they was digging the Dan Ryan hole. Because there was no highways like that in Chicago in the 50s. In the 50s, you know what I'm saying? Those, there used to be houses already, I remember as a little boy, they tore out all the houses. And then next thing you know, you saw these big old deep holes that going down, which was becoming the Dan Ryan. Me and my brother used to go down there and play. My family is basically from 3 states. My direct family. That's Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. But we probably from all the states, because my great grandfather on my mother's father's side of the family was born in 1817, something like that. And he was enslaved in Virginia. And he was shipped out of Virginia into Georgia. So he was in a northern, less of a little bit more sophisticated British kind of slave state to a low-down, dirty southern state. Because he had levels, here at the Virginia, they were a little more sophisticated, so they treated their slaves a little bit different. But when you get to places like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, they real barbaric. Keep these Negroes in line, So yeah, Georgia on the other side. Both my grandmothers and great grandmother, they from Alabama. And then my grandfather, on my father's side of the family, he's from Mississippi. So I got these 3 different routes across 3 different states. We had on just 1/4 of my family. My father was born here, but not my grandfather. My grandfather was born in Mississippi. And so we had a family reunion on 1/4 of my family. I was going to tell you about this. So we showed up from 27 cities, and there was 2,200 of us. And it was like mind-boggling, because my elders had did this research, and they had put these charts up, and they knew all this historical stuff. And they told me, we never knew as little kids. I was like maybe in my 20s. This was, let's see, when was that 20s? I may have been in my 40s. It was like it was 91 or 92 with this reunion. So yeah, it was like 20, all these people showed up. And they did this extensive stuff on just the family tree. And so when you start finding all these people that you have family relationships with that you never knew because nobody, see my grandfather was a Pullman porter on this side of the family. And his brother was, and several cousins, they were all Pullman porters. So one thing they were able to do, you know, I tell people when we started migrating out of the South, a lot of people's families got disconnected because they went to different states and there wasn't no social media, wasn't no telephone like that you could walk up and call somebody. So the families got disconnected, you know, and so my grandfather and them, by them being Pullman porters, they was able to keep people connected. Because they would go through a different town, so-and-so is in town, and so-and-so is in town. And he said it makes things work in terms of communication amongst our family on that side of the family. And I tell him, the brother, he asked me about that thing I told him about, that you remember Willie Gault played for the Bears? Well, my mother's a Gault. So I'm walking downtown on Michigan Avenue, and who do I run into? Willie Gault. So I said to Willie, hey, Willie. I said, hey, man, you my little cousin. He said, I ain't got no relatives in Chicago. I said, oh, man, you my little cousin. You do have relatives in Chicago. So he said, all right, okay, no problem. You know, sometimes people think you try to get their money. I get your money, I understand. You know, you don't know me from Adam. I'm telling you something, you from Georgia, you don't know that. We come from Georgia, but we just in Chicago, you know what I'm saying? So we had a family reunion. When the guy comes up in a limousine, the chauffeur driving, you know, he's a star, you know. So we sitting around at the table, they cook food, we sitting there eating. He get out, he walk around everybody, hey, Willie. He get to me, and he look at me and say, so you remember me now, don't you? Because I'm hard to forget. I'm big and I'm young, but I'm big. You know, I was that time, I made it like the fridge, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm steady 6'4", 6'5" on a good day. And so he saw me, and he was like, oh, man. I said, I told you, man. I was just trying to tell you had family in Chicago. You ain't here alone, believe this, you know. So we don't really have that chance now. Those are things I'm really grateful for. That I have a chance to have hooked up on those types of levels. So then, you know, I go to family year, like I tell you, and find out that Chris Tucker's my cousin. Warren Moon's my cousin. Like, oh, okay. You know, you don't know how vast your family is across America. You know what I'm saying? Because we don't think how many generations we've been here. You know, but, you know. Yeah, my mother and father both grew up in Chicago. My grandmother, well, she didn't grow up, she was 2 years old when she was brought here from Alabama. Because they came like in 1908. No, 1910, excuse me. Yeah, about 1910, because she was born in 1908. You know, I kind of think I was always involved with the Black Power, you know, because I was black. And, you know, just seeing what was going on around me made me become very conscious of who I was. I grew up going to Catholic school. You know, I always tell people about how they put my brother out of public school because we were integrating in the neighborhood, and my brother had to fight with a little white boy. They say they beat the white boy so tough, they wanted to have him locked up, call the police and lock him up. You know, and so when I reflect back on them years, you know, it's like you see these different things having gone to Catholic school that you know kids in public school are getting the same information, you know, or just the sharing stuff that we would walk up on. You know, having went to Catholic school, like I say, there's all kind of perks that you was getting that you wasn't getting in public school. You know, I mean, my brother had some summer jobs one time when they were building Evergreen Park. I think I was maybe 10 years old. And the church that I went to, you know, Al Capone went to 2 churches in the South Side in his latter years. That was the church at 71st and St. Columbus, 71st and was at Prairie of Calumet. In between Prairie and Calumet, let me say it like that. St. Columbus. Or he was the little church that my school was at called St. Carthage, which is this little bitty hidden school that if you didn't know it was a school, you would have known it was a school. And he would come over there. So his sister was there as a nun. And man, she cooked us up with these jobs. She told these Italian boys to give us some jobs. We was altar boys. They gave us these jobs, and they were building Evergreen Park at the time. You know, the Italians, you know, that's their town. So it allowed me to see a lot of ethnic stuff that I would have never seen before. Just haven't been in Catholic school, you know. Because we would play basketball. I remember coming out to where Father Flake is at, when there wasn't no black kids going there. It was all white. You know, 77th and Elizabeth, a racing. In between Elizabeth and racing, yeah. Wasn't no, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, man, it was a real experience, man.